Why did the clipboard slip from his hands? That question hung in the air, though no one dared speak it. The armory was alive with the metallic stomp of boots and the laughter of a SEAL team rolling in for inspection. Their presence filled the room like thunder, loud and careless. Yet the silence that followed the clatter of dropped metal cut sharper than any joke. Tessa Ward kept moving, cloth in hand, polishing the scope of the M2010 rifle. Slow, deliberate circles. She didn't look up when the clipboard hit the floor. She didn't flinch when the laughter faded. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass of the scope, steady, almost defiant in its quiet. The lieutenant who had dropped the clipboard bent quickly, shaking his head, embarrassed. His men chuckled. The moment passed for them, but his eyes lingered. He had seen something, just a sliver of metal hanging from her collar, a dog tag, numbers etched faintly into its surface. He couldn't shake it, even as the room carried on. Tessa bent lower, hiding the tag again. Her hand moved in practiced rhythm, wiping the last smear from the scope. To everyone else she was invisible, just another storage clerk. The woman who polished rifles, cataloged bolts, and kept things lined up for men who carried them into the world. But there was something none of them understood. Her alarm had gone off that morning at 5:30, same as always. The world outside her apartment was dark, the kind of stillness only broken by the faint hum of distant generators and the first hint of desert wind. She had pulled her hair back into a tight bun, slipped into her uniform, laced her boots. No hesitation, no wasted movement. 3 years of repetition carved into muscle memory. By 6:00 she was walking across base, the rising sun painting faint streaks of orange over steel buildings and razor wire. She didn't nod to anyone she passed, didn't smile. Most didn't even see her. To them, she was the woman with the armory key card, the one who always smelled faintly of gun, oil, and dust. The work was quiet, orderly, comforting in its way. Each rifle she cleaned, each scope she aligned, each bolt she checked, it all followed a rhythm, like a prayer she had long since memorized. The repetition made her invisible, safe. That was the point. And yet, even here in the silence, memory crept in. Sometimes, when her hands moved across a scope, she remembered the way her pulse used to slow, the way the world outside the glass would sharpen, narrow, until all that existed was the space between crosshairs and a breath. Sometimes, when she aligned barrels along the rack, she remembered laying belly down in dust, waiting for hours that felt like days, every muscle stiff but her mind sharper than a blade. But she never spoke of it, not once. 3 years in the armory had shaped her reputation into something small, forgettable. A corporal had once called her more mop than Marine. The others had laughed, not cruel, just careless. Tessa had smiled faintly, said nothing. That was easier, safer. When the young privates wondered why she never joined live fire drills, she shrugged. When officers passed her without a glance, she kept her head down. Her identity, carefully wrapped in silence, became the armory girl. But the truth of Tessa Ward's story was written in a different place. Not on her uniform, not in her file, not even in the quiet repetition of her days. It was etched into a single dog tag, a number almost no one alive understood, 2940. Because the woman who seemed invisible had once been declared gone, missing in action, her file closed, her name carved into ceremonies of remembrance. Her family had mourned, her unit had grieved. The army had written her off. And maybe, in some ways, they weren't wrong. The Tessa Ward who had lain in Afghan dust, scope pressed to her cheek, waiting for wind to die over nearly 3 kilometers of barren ground, that Tessa had died out there. What returned was someone else. Someone who cleaned rifles in silence. Someone who avoided attention, because attention was dangerous. But destiny doesn't forget. It lingers, waiting for cracks in the mask. And on this morning, with a Navy SEAL team filling the armory and a lieutenant's gaze caught on the faint glint of her dog tag, silence was slipping. "Careful, Ward, don't scratch that glass," a private called across the room. His voice was playful, his grin wide. "Wouldn't want to actually use one of those, huh?" The laughter that followed wasn't sharp, not yet. Just the easy teasing of soldiers who thought they knew the hierarchy of worth. Combat men. Storage girl. They didn't mean to wound, not really. But the words landed anyway. Tessa didn't answer. She never did. She kept the cloth moving in calm circles, the rhythm swallowing the sting. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He didn't laugh with the others. He didn't look away. The inspection was in full swing. Bolts tested. Scopes adjusted. Rifles passed hand to hand like toys in the grip of men who lived for the field. Tessa slipped between them quietly, putting each weapon back where it belonged. "Ward," a sergeant barked, not cruel, just commanding. "Grab me the logbook, let's go." She moved quickly, handing it over without meeting his eyes. One of the SEALs leaned in as he signed. "What's it like spending all day dusting rifles you never fire?" His tone was casual but sharp. "Boring as hell, I bet." A chuckle rose from his teammates. Tessa didn't look at him. She didn't flinch. She simply held the pen steady, then stepped back, cloth still folded in her other hand. Silence was her armor. But the lieutenant noticed again. His eyes didn't leave her. By noon, the jokes grew bolder. A civilian contractor, sipping coffee, leaned against the racks. His voice carried loud enough for the whole room. "Never understood why they let non-combat staff handle the good steel. Seems wasted, doesn't it?" Another SEAL smirked. "Bet the farthest shot she's ever taken was 10 feet, dust bunny across the floor." The room roared. Even the young private slapped his knee, grinning. "She probably doesn't know a windage knob from a coffee mug," another added. That laugh landed harder. Tessa's hand froze for a moment against the rifle barrel. The steel was cold under her palm. Her breath caught, but she forced her face steady. The cloth moved again, steady circles. Inside, though, the words pressed like stones against an old scar. The lieutenant's chest burned with something he couldn't name. Anger, maybe, or recognition. He said nothing, not yet. Afternoon sunlight slanted across the racks when a young SEAL caught sight of her dog tag again. "What's that number, Ward? 2940, your locker combo or maybe your max bench press?" His smirk spread wide. "Yeah, 2940 pounds, that's about right." The laughter was instant. Tessa's hand shot up, tucking the chain back beneath her collar. Her silence fed their fire. "Bowling score," someone else added. "Or how many times she's polished the same rifle." The sergeant chuckled this time, too. The lieutenant didn't. His face darkened, his gut clenched. Because he had seen it before. That number wasn't random. It wasn't a joke. It was a ghost from a classified briefing, a number whispered with reverence among officers. 2940 meters. A shot impossible, a shot confirmed. A shot made by a soldier who was supposed to be gone. His pulse quickened, but he said nothing, not yet. The laughter filled the armory, but it rang hollow now. And as the sun dipped lower, streaking gold across polished steel, the lieutenant knew the truth. This wasn't just a storage clerk. This was her. The ghost behind the glass. And tomorrow he would prove it. How could a silence feel louder than laughter? The next morning, when the SEAL team returned, the air was different. Their boots still clattered against the concrete, their clipboards still shuffled with routine, but the careless edge of yesterday's humor was gone. The room held something sharper: curiosity, unease, a tension none of them named aloud. The lieutenant walked in last. His eyes swept the racks, the men, the rifles, then found her. Tessa was already at work, bent over the M2010. Same deliberate movements, same calm rhythm. Her hand pressed the cloth in circles over the scope, as though yesterday hadn't happened. As though the laughter hadn't cut. As though the number on her dog tag hadn't seared itself into his mind. but he saw something different now. Her movements were too steady, too exact, like a breath measured between trigger squeezes. "Ward," one of the younger SEALs called, forcing a smirk. "You ever even fire one of these rifles you keep wiping down?" No answer, as always. Silence was her shield. The SEAL placed the rifle on the table in front of her, his grin wide enough for the others to catch. "Go on, show me how you'd hold it." There was laughter again, but not like before. It wasn't free or careless. It was edged, uncertain. They wanted a joke, but they also wanted to see what she would do. Tessa froze, cloth in hand. Her jaw tightened. For a moment she looked like she might refuse, but then slowly she set the cloth aside. With one smooth motion, she flipped the bipod legs down, lowered the rifle to the table, and slid behind it. Her cheek pressed to the stock, left hand adjusting the scope with fluid ease, right finger hovering near the trigger guard. The cloth slipped from her fingers to the floor. The room went silent. Her posture was perfect, not the awkward mimicry of someone who had read about it in a manual, not the clumsy enthusiasm of a recruit. This was the stance of someone who had lived there, hours behind the glass, days breathing the stillness of patience. The lieutenant's chest tightened. He knew that posture. "Not bad," the SEAL muttered, trying to cover his unease with a smirk. "But that's just stance. Anybody could." "Your grip is wrong." The words came from her, calm, quiet, but they cut the air like a round through silence. The SEAL blinked. "What?" Without lifting her cheek from the stock, Tessa's voice stayed steady. "Your support hand's too far forward. You'll fight the recoil, pull it back. Let the stock do its work." Her tone wasn't arrogant. It wasn't even defensive. It was instructional, as though she had said it 100 times before. The SEAL stared at her, confused, challenged. The lieutenant stepped forward, his voice sharp but steady. "Show him." Tessa's eyes flicked to him. For a heartbeat, she looked as though she might refuse, but something in his tone, something firm but not mocking, made her obey. She lifted her head from the scope, motioning the SEAL down. "Here, try again." She adjusted his grip, shifted the sling against his shoulder, then stepped back. The SEAL dry-fired. The sharp click echoed through the room, even without a round chambered. The steadiness of the shot was obvious. The sergeant watching gave a low whistle. "Smooth." The SEAL sat up, unsettled. He didn't laugh. He didn't joke. He just looked at her differently. Tessa bent to pick up her cloth, her face calm again, impassive, as though nothing had happened. She began polishing the rifle, her shoulders hunched against the silence pressing down. But the damage was done. Every man in the room had seen it. The ease, the authority, the reflex of someone who had lived behind a scope. The young private whispered, "How'd she know that?" The contractor frowned, coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. That wasn't storage training. The lieutenant's chest pounded. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't luck. This was reflex, memory, history clawing its way back into the present. The armory's laughter was gone now. In its place was something heavier, suspicion. The lieutenant finally spoke. His voice was low, but it carried. "Ward." She didn't look up. "Tessa Ward." Her hand froze mid-wipe. Slowly she lifted her head, met his eyes for the first time. The room stilled. "You were in Afghanistan, weren't you?" His tone wasn't a question. It was a statement wrapped in disbelief. Her throat tightened. "I worked storage." The lieutenant stepped closer, boots echoing. His gaze never left her. "No, you worked a scope." A murmur rippled through the room. "What's he talking about?" the private whispered. The lieutenant ignored him, his voice sharpened. 2,940 meters, the longest confirmed engagement in U.S. history. One shooter made it. The name on the file was Tessa Ward. He paused, his breath catching. "And then MIA, missing in action. Everyone thought you were gone." Whispers spread like wildfire. SEALs exchanged looks. The contractor's smirk vanished. Even the sergeant shifted uneasily. The private shook his head, stammering. "No, no way, she works." "She is," the lieutenant cut in, voice sharp, "the record." All eyes turned to her. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. She lowered the cloth, folding it carefully in her hands, as though delaying the inevitable. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but weighted. "I was listed MIA for a reason." The sergeant stepped forward, eyes wide. "But how did you?" "Not here," Tessa said quietly. "Not now." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He didn't press, but his tone carried reverence. "You made that shot." The weight of the words silenced the room. Gone was the laughter, gone were the jokes. In their place, awe, shame. The seal she had corrected the day before swallowed hard. His earlier arrogance evaporated, replaced with something closer to respect. The private's cheeks burned crimson, his own mockery echoing back at him with cruelty. The contractor lowered his eyes, coffee forgotten. The room shifted. The woman they had dismissed as invisible was no longer background. She was history. The lieutenant straightened, his voice steady, reverent. "Ma'am, it's an honor." His salute snapped sharp. The SEALs followed, boots shifting, bodies stiffening. Even the sergeant raised his hand, grave and precise. The air was still, heavy with recognition. Tessa didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly, reluctantly, she returned the salute, humble, hesitant, her lips barely parted. "I just did my job." But no one believed her. Dust floated in golden shafts of light, drifting between racks of rifles like witnesses. The young private's face burned deeper as he raised his own hand, shame written across him. And in that silence, something cracked inside her. She had spent years hiding, years letting the world believe she was gone. And now, with a single set of numbers etched into a dog tag, silence was shattered. Her eyes glistened in the harsh light. Respect had found her. But peace would be harder. Because ghosts don't rest just because someone finally salutes them. Why did her silence feel heavier than the rifles on the rack? The armory had gone still. Boots had shifted, salutes had fallen, but the air hadn't lifted. Not really. It pressed down on everyone like invisible weight. Tessa stood among them, the cloth still folded in her hand, her eyes lowered. They wanted words, details, confessions, but she gave them nothing. Because to explain meant to remember. And remembering was dangerous. Her gaze dropped to the floor, but in her mind it wasn't concrete she saw. It was dust, sand, a pale horizon where heat shimmered and silence stretched forever. The armory dissolved, the laughter, the rifles, the polished steel gone. She was back there. Afghanistan. The ridge was jagged, sun-bleached stone cutting into her elbows where she pressed against it. Her cheek lay against the stock, her eye behind the glass. Every breath came slow, every muscle held still. The desert wind whispered over barren ground, carrying the faint taste of dust and gunpowder. "Ward," a voice had whispered in her earpiece. Her spotter, Miller, steady, calm. The kind of voice that held men together when everything else broke apart. "We don't get this chance twice. You see him." Her scope narrowed on the far ridge. A figure moved there, not hurried, not careless. A commander, enemy high-value target, surrounded by fighters but distinct, deliberate, the one the chatter said was impossible to reach. Distance, 2,940 meters, nearly 3 kilometers of air, dust, wind, and mirage. Her finger hovered near the trigger guard. Her pulse steadied. She didn't answer Miller, not yet. Because shots like this weren't just math. They were life, death, a gamble across impossible space. "Wind's picking up," Miller muttered. His scope swept beside hers, eyes locked. 3, maybe 4 miles an hour, quartering left. Her lips moved without sound. Calculations. 2 clicks for every mile per hour. Adjust for distance. Adjust for spin drift. Elevation drop more than 30 meters at this range. She adjusted the knob, one click, another. Her hand moved steady, unconscious. Ward, Miller pressed, "Talk to me." But she didn't. Her silence was her ritual, her breath, her prayer. The target lifted a hand, pointing toward something unseen. His fighters shifted with him, their rifles slung casually. No urgency. No idea death was already waiting across the horizon. Tessa exhaled, slow, shallow, her heart slowed with it. There was no sound, no war, no world beyond the glass. Only the shot. But before her finger tightened, a crackle in her headset pulled her back. "Intel confirms," another voice command in the rear. "That's him. If you've got him, take it. I repeat, take it." Her jaw clenched, she whispered, barely audible, "Copy." Miller's voice softened. "Tess, this is history if you hit it, but you don't have to." Her throat tightened. The weight of his words pressed deeper than the rifle stock, because it wasn't history she was carrying, it was men, lives already lost, blood already spilled. A convoy ambushed 2 days earlier, soldiers burned into memory. Their screams still echoed in her chest. She steadied her breath again. The crosshairs floated, just a fraction. The wind was playful, treacherous. Her finger brushed the trigger guard. And then, "Ward!" Her eyes snapped open. The armory was back, rifles concrete, the lieutenant's gaze sharp and unrelenting. "You don't have to tell us," he said, his voice low, "but you're not hiding anymore, not from me." Her chest rose and fell sharply, memory still heavy. The seals shifted, restless. They hadn't heard what she had just lived again in her mind. They hadn't felt the sun on stone, the whisper of dust, the impossible weight of 3 kilometers. But she had, and it clung to her like a second skin. Tessa turned away, tucking the cloth into her pocket. "The past belongs in the ground," she said softly. But her hands trembled as she lifted the next rifle. Because part of her was still there, belly in the dirt, finger on the trigger, 2,940 meters away from changing everything. How long could a single breath last? Flat against the Afghan ridge, Tessa felt every grain of dust grind into her skin. Her cheek pressed into the stock, her heartbeat slowed to something unnatural. Around her, the world was harsh, sun beating down, rocks cutting through uniform fabric, the air thick with heat shimmer. But inside the scope, the world was narrow, clear. The figure moved again on the far ridge, almost casual. A hand lifted, pointing. Fighters shifted in response. A commander issuing orders, unaware that death balanced on glass nearly 3 kilometers away. "Ward," Miller whispered beside her. His breath was steady, but his words carried tension. "That's him. You've got 1 shot." She didn't answer. Her silence wasn't hesitation, it was discipline. Her mind ticked through variables. Distance, 2,940 meters. Wind, quartering left, 3 miles an hour steady, gusting to 4. Elevation drop, almost 100 feet. Spin drift correction, subtle but real. Her fingers moved with unconscious certainty. 3 clicks left, 1 up. A hair's adjustment to the stock's pressure into her shoulder. Miller glanced at her. "It's impossible, Tess." Her lips barely parted. So was last week's convoy. Silence fell between them, heavy as stone. The memory of burned vehicles still haunted her, men screaming, radios filled with static and final words. This shot wasn't history, it was consequence. She exhaled slowly, lungs emptying until her chest stilled. Her heartbeat slowed, 1 heavy thud every second, syncing with the faint rhythm of wind brushing over her ears. Through the glass, time stretched. The commander's features blurred in the mirage, but the outline was enough. The certainty wasn't visual, it was instinct. Her finger slipped to the trigger, rested there, gentle, no rush. Miller's whisper cut through the heat, "Send it when you're ready." She was. The squeeze was invisible, not a jerk, not a twitch, just pressure building until it broke like a whisper. The rifle roared. The sound rolled across the canyon, swallowed quickly by distance. Dust leapt around the muzzle, drifting away on the wind. And then silence. The bullet was gone, a speck of copper and steel spinning through 3 kilometers of shifting air. It carried with it everything: grief, rage, duty, the weight of names carved into memory. 5 seconds passed. Miller's eye stayed locked in his scope, tracking. "Come on," he whispered. 7 seconds. 8. And then impact. The commander collapsed mid-step, body folding as though the earth had pulled him down. Fighters froze around him, stunned, looking skyward though the sky held no answer. Miller's sharp inhale broke the silence. "Jesus Christ, you hit it." Tessa stayed pressed to the stock, eyes still in the scope. She didn't breathe, didn't move. She watched dust settle around the fallen figure, watched chaos ripple through the fighters as realization spread. 3 kilometers away, and yet she could feel it. The finality, the weight. Miller pulled back, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's a record. No one's ever." "Don't say it," she cut in softly. Because it wasn't a record to her. It wasn't glory. It was necessity. A man was dead and others would live because of it. But the weight didn't balance. It never would. "Ward," Command's voice crackled over comms. "Confirm, did you hit?" Miller keyed his mic. "Target down, confirmed." Cheers erupted faintly through the line, distant voices, celebrating the impossible. But beside the rifle, Tessa stayed still. Her cheek pressed against the stock, her eye fixed on the scope. She didn't join them. Because in her chest, silence echoed louder than victory. Miller glanced at her. His expression was mixed pride, awe, worry. "Tess, they'll write your name into history for this." She finally pulled back from the glass. Her face was pale, her eyes flat. "History doesn't bleed." Miller said nothing. He just watched her, understanding more than most ever could. There was chaos. Radio chatter, hurried movement, adrenaline running high. But Tessa moved like a ghost. Quiet, efficient, untouched by the buzz of celebration. That night when the camp went quiet, she sat alone cleaning the rifle. Her hands moved steady, cloth circling the glass just as it did now in the armory years later. But every circle was haunted. Every pass of the cloth reflected not just glass, but the moment of collapse, the ripple of disbelief, the silence after the shot. She placed the rifle down, staring at it as though it might answer questions she couldn't voice. Her hand touched her dog tag, the number freshly etched into steel. 2940. She hadn't asked for it, she hadn't wanted it, but it was hers now. A distance carved into her life, a weight no one else would carry. And when the mission files closed, when the dust settled, when she disappeared into the chaos of war, her name was listed MIA, lost in the shuffle of operations, declared gone. For years she had let it stay that way. Because sometimes being dead was safer than living with what you'd done. The armory returned slowly, like light seeping back into a dark room. Rifles gleamed under fluorescent bulbs. Dust floated in golden shafts. Tessa stood there, cloth in her hand again, her breathing uneven. The men around her watched in silence, unsure what to say, unsure if words could even reach where she had just gone. The lieutenant stepped forward. His voice was low, steady. "It was you that shot." Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Because she didn't need to. Her silence was enough. And in that silence, every man in the room felt the weight of 2,940 meters. A distance too far for most, a shot too impossible to believe. And a burden one woman carried alone. What good is the longest shot in history if no one remembers you lived to make it? The desert didn't celebrate her. The silence after the shot was heavier than victory. Tessa remembered it all too well. The commander's body collapsing, fighters scattering in confusion, radios erupting in frantic voices. But chaos didn't wait. Within minutes, their position was compromised. Miller's voice cut through her headset, sharp and urgent. "We've got to move, now." She pulled the bolt, chambered a fresh round, eyes still locked on the ridge. Fighters were swarming, searching for the ghost who had reached across nearly 3 kilometers. "Ward," Miller barked, his hand pressed her shoulder. "Rifles up, we fall back." She nodded, finally tearing her eye from the glass. The M2010 felt heavier than ever as she slung it. Every step down the ridge was jagged stone under boots, every breath ragged with dust. Gunfire cracked in the distance, not close, not yet, but coming. The route wound through dry gullies, the kind that channeled sound in strange ways. Voices echoed, shouts in a language she had learned only through context: hunting, rage, vengeance. Miller led, his rifle sweeping steady. She followed close, her scope bouncing against her chest with every step. Halfway through the gully, it happened. A burst of fire rattled off stone, bullets kicking up dust just feet away. They dove, slammed into the dirt. Tessa's shoulder screamed as the M2010 dug into her side. "Contact left," Miller's shout echoed. His rifle barked in reply, precise bursts. Tessa rolled, bringing her scope to bear. Through the glass, shapes flickered between stone, fighters closing fast. Her breath steadied, the world narrowed. She fired once, twice, each shot deliberate, slow, surgical. The distance was shorter now, 300 meters, maybe less. Easy by her standards, too easy. But there were too many. Miller's voice cracked in her ear. "Ward, we're pinned. They've got angles on us." The comm line erupted, commands shouting, distorted. The team was still 10 minutes out, 10 minutes they didn't have. A grenade clattered into the gully. Miller shoved her hard. The blast swallowed sound, fire ripping through stone. Her vision blurred, ears ringing. She felt the heat tear across her back, the sting of shrapnel biting deep. Her body hit the dirt hard. She tried to push up, but her arms shook. The M2010 lay just feet away, dust covering its scope. Through blurred vision, she saw Miller. He was shouting, firing, moving toward her. His face twisted with something she hadn't seen before: desperation. "Tess, stay with me." His voice was faint through the ringing. She tried to answer, nothing came. Her world tilted, dust, stone, blood. And then darkness. When she woke, it was night, cold, silent. Her body ached, every muscle screaming. The gully was empty, no gunfire, no voices, just the hollow silence of a battlefield abandoned. Her radio crackled faintly, voices distant, distorted, words she could barely piece together. Casualties, no recovery, Ward and Miller presumed KIA. Her throat tightened. She pressed the mic, but only static answered. Her fingers clutched her dog tag. The number etched there burned against her skin: 2940. She was alive, but the world had already buried her. For 3 days she moved alone. Nights spent hidden in shadows, days crawling across barren stone. No water, little food. Her body barely holding together, but her training kept her alive. One step at a time, one breath at a time. On the 4th day she reached an outpost. American, faces she recognized. Relief surged until she saw their expressions. Shock, horror. "Tessa Ward," one of them whispered, as though saying her name broke a rule. You're supposed to be gone." Word spread quickly, she should have been dead. The file had already been closed, ceremonies held, families. Miller hadn't made it. That truth cut deeper than shrapnel. He had saved her, shoved her clear, and the blast had taken him instead. The weight of survival pressed harder than the rifle ever had. Her debrief was short, clinical, too short. They didn't want details, didn't want the complications of a soldier who had come back from the dead. The recommendation came swiftly: transfer, storage duty, out of sight, out of mind. Her record faded, the world moved on. And she let it. Because the silence was easier. The armory returned around her like a cruel trick of light, rifles gleaming, dust in golden shafts, men starring, salutes still heavy in the air. Tessa's hand lingered on the dog tag at her collar. The lieutenant stepped closer, voice low. "That's why you were listed MIA." Her throat tightened, she didn't answer. "You survived," he pressed. His tone wasn't accusatory, it was reverent. "But you didn't come back the same." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp, haunted. "No one does." Silence fell again. The SEALs shifted uneasily. Their earlier mockery hung between them like smoke. The young private's face burned crimson. He couldn't meet her eyes. The sergeant cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," she said softly. Her voice carried no anger, only fatigue. "That's the point." The lieutenant studied her, his jaw tight. He had seen soldiers break, seen men lose themselves in far less, but standing before him was something different, a ghost who had chosen her silence. And for the first time, he understood. Respect wasn't enough. What she carried was beyond that. The room felt smaller now, less like an armory, more like sacred ground. And still she said nothing more. Because some battles were fought in silence, long after the rifles cooled. What do soldiers talk about the night before history writes their names? The desert was quiet that evening, not the silence of peace, but the kind of silence that comes before something inevitable. Tessa sat on a crate, rifle across her lap, the sun bleeding into the horizon in a wash of orange and purple. The heat of the day lingered, but the air had begun to cool, carrying dust and the faint smell of diesel. Miller sat beside her, boots stretched out, hands resting on his knees. His spotter's scope leaned against the wall, forgotten for the moment. He wasn't watching the terrain. He was watching her. "You're too quiet," he said softly. Tessa kept her eyes on the rifle, running the cloth along the barrel in steady strokes. "You've said that before. And you've never answered." She didn't look at him, didn't need to. Silence was easier. But Miller wasn't like the others. He didn't fill the void with jokes or dismissals. He let silence stretch, patient, steady, like a man who knew how long a sniper could wait. Finally he spoke again. "Tomorrow might be nothing, or it might be everything." Tessa paused, cloth hovering over the steel. The words hung between them, heavy, undeniable. "You ever think about it?" he asked. "What happens if we don't come back?" Her throat tightened. She forced the cloth to keep moving. "Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because thinking about it doesn't change it." Miller leaned back, head tipping against the wall, eyes tracing the fading colors of sky. "You're wrong. It changes how you go out." Tessa glanced at him, brow furrowed. "You planning on dying tomorrow?" He chuckled, low and rough. "Planning on surviving, but death doesn't care about plans, Tess." She hated when he used her first name. Not because it was unwelcome, but because it reminded her she was still human beneath the uniform, beneath the rifle. He turned to her, his face calm. "Tell me something real, something no one else knows." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to refuse, but something in his eyes disarmed her. After a long silence, she whispered, "I used to hate the dark when I was a kid. Couldn't sleep unless I heard the hum of the fridge. That sound, it meant I wasn't alone." Miller smiled faintly. "That's good, real." She exhaled, shaking her head. "Your turn." He thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I write letters I never send, to my sister, to my old man, sometimes just to myself. Stuff I don't want in my head anymore. Burn 'em after, like cleaning house." "Does it help?" "Sometimes, but some things, they stick." They fell silent again. The stars began to show, sharp against the desert black. Miller's voice softened. "Ward, you know if tomorrow goes wrong, they'll never tell the story right. They'll make it sound clean, simple, like it didn't hurt." Tessa's grip tightened on the rifle. "That's war." "Yeah, but promise me something." He leaned forward, his gaze firm. "Don't let silence bury you. Don't let them erase who you are." Her chest ached, she couldn't answer. Miller reached over, tapped the rifle stock gently. "This thing doesn't define you, not the shot, not the record, you do." She wanted to believe him. But she already knew. If tomorrow demanded it, the rifle would decide for her. They sat together long into the night. No more words, just two soldiers breathing under the same stars, knowing tomorrow might tear one of them away. And it did. The memory dissolved like smoke. The armory came back, rifles lined in perfect rows, dust swirling in golden shafts, men staring silent. Tessa's hands gripped the cloth too tightly, knuckles white. She set the rifle down, but her chest still rose too fast, her pulse too sharp. The lieutenant's voice broke the silence. "There was someone with you." Her eyes snapped to his, hard and sharp. "Miller," he said quietly. He didn't ask, he knew. The SEALs exchanged glances. None of them spoke. They felt it in her silence, in the tension that rippled through her shoulders. Tessa swallowed hard. Her voice was low, rough. "He didn't come back." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any briefing report. The young private shifted, his earlier mockery burning fresh shame into his face. He looked at her now not as the armory girl, but as someone who had carried another man's absence every day since. The sergeant exhaled heavily, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry." Tessa's gaze dropped to the floor. "Don't be," he knew the cost. The lieutenant stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "But you've carried it alone." Her jaw tightened. "That's the job." "No," he said firmly. "That's the burden. The job ends, the burden doesn't." For a moment the armory felt colder. The rifles on the racks seemed less like tools and more like gravestones. The SEALs stood silent, their respect shifting into something deeper. Not just awe for a record shot, but grief for the cost they hadn't seen before. Tessa folded the cloth slowly, tucking it into her pocket. Her hands trembled as she did. Miller's words echoed in her mind, from that last night under the stars. "Don't let silence bury you." But silence was all she had left. What's heavier, the rifle on your back, or the silence of being the only one left? When the blast faded, there was nothing. No sound, no breath, no world, just darkness. Tessa opened her eyes to grit pressing into her lashes. The night sky spun above her, stars sharp against black, too bright for how faint her body felt. Pain clawed through her side, hot and deep where shrapnel had torn. Her ears rang, a high, endless whine that swallowed Miller's voice, swallowed everything. Her fingers reached instinctively for the rifle, found it, cold, familiar, a lifeline. "Miller," her voice was a rasp, barely audible. She turned, forcing her body through broken stone. But Miller wasn't there. Only blood. The gully was empty now. Echoes of the fight had vanished, as if swallowed whole by the desert. The enemy had moved on, chasing ghosts they thought were already dead. Her chest tightened. Every breath was shallow fire. She pressed a hand to her wound, felt warmth seeping between her fingers. Her radio crackled faintly, voices distant. "Casualties confirmed, Ward and Miller. No recovery possible, presumed KIA." The words hit harder than the blast. Her throat closed. She tried the mic, tried to force sound through shattered ribs. Static answered. She clutched her dog tag, 2940. The number burned against her skin. She was alive, but the world had already buried her. The next hours blurred. Pain, silence, dust. She crawled at first. Every movement tore fresh fire through her side. Her uniform clung with blood, dirt caking her skin. She followed the stars because there was nothing else. Thirst came quick. Her canteen was gone. Her lips cracked, tongue swelling. The desert wind offered no mercy, only the whisper of grit against stone. By dawn, she staggered to her feet, the rifle slung across her back like a cross. Every step carved into her muscles, each one heavier than the last. Shadows played tricks. Sometimes she saw Miller ahead of her, walking steady, rifle in hand, turning back to say something she couldn't hear. She followed, desperate, but when she blinked he was gone. She whispered to herself, voice raw, "One step, just one." And she kept moving. 3 days bled together. No food. Barely water scavenged from a dented canteen left behind in the dust. Her vision blurred, horizon bending. She thought she heard voices sometimes. Men calling her name. Miller shouting her forward. But when she looked, there was only sand. Her body wanted to quit, collapse, let the desert take her. But something deeper refused. The same thing that had steadied her finger on the trigger. The same thing that had slowed her heartbeat under the sun. The part of her that knew silence wasn't surrender. She kept moving. On the 4th day, a faint shadow appeared on the horizon. An outpost, American, real this time. Her body broke into a stumble run, legs giving out as she neared the gate. Soldiers rushed to meet her, rifles raised, then frozen in shock. "Tessa Ward," one of them whispered. She collapsed into their arms. The rifle clattered to the dirt beside her. Voices swirled around. Orders, medics, but one sentence cut through clearer than the rest. "She's supposed to be gone." Even as they lifted her, patched her wounds, carried her into safety, she heard it again, over and over. Supposed to be gone. Her body healed, her lungs filled again, but something inside her never left that gully. Because Miller hadn't made it. And because the world had already buried her. The armory returned like a slow exhale. Rifles gleamed under fluorescent light. Boots scuffed faintly against the floor. Tessa blinked hard, the memory retreating, leaving her chest heavy. The men around her were silent, watching. They didn't know what she had just walked through again in her mind, but they saw it in her eyes. The lieutenant stepped forward. His voice was quiet, steady. "You carried yourself back from the dead." Her lips pressed thin. "No, I just carried silence." The young private's eyes glistened, shame carved deep into his expression. His earlier words, "My little sister could do this," now felt like ash in his mouth. He opened it to speak, but nothing came. The sergeant lowered his head, respect etched into every line of his face. Even the contractor, who had smirked the day before, shifted uneasily. His coffee forgotten, his bravado gone. The room felt different now. Not an armory, not a workplace. A place heavy with ghosts, with the kind of truth no one could laugh away. Tessa's hand brushed her dog tag. The number etched there was small, faint. But in that silence, every man in the room understood it. Not as a record, not as glory. As survival. And survival always has a cost. Why did silence suddenly feel like the loudest thing in the room? The armory stood still. Rows of rifles gleamed under pale fluorescent light, but no one moved toward them now. No checklists shuffled. No jokes cut through the air. The laughter that had filled the room only a day before had been buried beneath something heavier. Every man there had seen it, felt it. Not just the dog tag, not just the stance, not just the whispered formula of wind and distance. They had glimpsed the truth in her eyes, the kind of truth that never needed a speech. Tessa Ward, the woman they had dismissed as the armory girl, had carried ghosts heavier than all their rifles combined. The lieutenant stood nearest her, his hand at his side, jaw tight. His gaze held her like a weight, not out of judgment but out of reverence. "You don't owe us anything," he said quietly. The others shifted, uneasy. Tessa's hands worked the cloth across a rifle's stock. Slow, measured, she didn't look up. "I never did." The private who had mocked her swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "Ma'am, I didn't know, She lifted a hand, cutting him off gently. Not harsh, not angry, just final. "You don't need to say it. Just remember, you never know the battle someone else is already fighting." His eyes dropped. His throat bobbed as he nodded, shame heavy across his young face. The sergeant cleared his throat. "Ward, you should be honored properly, recognized." Her cloth stilled. For the first time she looked up. Her eyes were calm, but the weight in them silenced the room. Recognition doesn't bring Miller back. It doesn't change the silence. No one argued. The contractor, who had smirked, laughed, sipped coffee like the room was his stage, shifted uncomfortably. His hand tightened around his cup. Then, in a rare moment of humility, he set it aside. His voice was rough. "Respect, ma'am. You've got mine." Tessa nodded once, nothing more. The lieutenant's voice carried again, steady, almost ceremonial. "You're standing in front of someone who made the impossible real, someone who carried it alone. Treat this armory as sacred ground." Boots shifted, shoulders squared, no one disagreed. For a long moment, silence lingered thicker than dust. Tessa folded the cloth, slipping it into her pocket. Her hand brushed her dog tag, the faint numbers etched there catching the light. 2940, a number that had followed her into every silence since. She exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening just a fraction. "I'm not here for records, I just wanted quiet." The lieutenant nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "And yet, quiet doesn't erase what you did." Her gaze held his for a long moment. Then she lowered it, whispering softly, "Who I was is gone." The private, still burning with shame, spoke again, barely above a whisper. "With respect, ma'am, not to us. Not anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy, true. For the first time in years, a faint smile touched her lips. It wasn't joy. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, sadness and peace woven together. She turned back to the racks, sliding the rifle into its place. The polished scope reflected her face, not the sniper, not the record, not the ghost, just Tessa Ward, the woman who dusted rifles. And maybe that was enough. The seals filed out one by one, quieter than they had entered. No jokes, no bravado, just glances over shoulders, eyes softer, steps slower, as though they were leaving a place that demanded reverence. The sergeant lingered, his salute sharp, crisp, more than regulation required. She returned it simply, humbly. The lieutenant was the last to leave. He paused at the door, his voice steady, low. "You may not want recognition, Ward, but you deserve respect, and you have it, always." She didn't answer, just gave the faintest nod, turning back to the rifles. The door closed. The armory fell silent again. Dust floated in shafts of light. Rifles gleamed in still rows. Tessa stood alone, hand brushing her dog tag one last time. The number was small, faint, but it had carried her whole story. 2940 meters. A distance impossible to imagine. A distance that had cost her everything and given her nothing in return but silence. And yet now, for the first time, that silence wasn't empty. It was filled with something else. Respect. She turned off the lights, the armory sinking into shadow. Her boots echoed softly as she stepped into the hallway. No speeches, no ceremony, no applause. Just quiet dignity. Because true courage doesn't seek recognition. It lives quietly until the world finally remembers to honor it.